The conversation will happen here on the couch between our panelists, who will introduce themselves in a second. It'll happen for 30 to 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to the room and go from there. So take it away, Anne.
Yeah. That's also a brilliant idea to have people introduce themselves.
Yes, that helps.
My homework went a little awry this morning, so I'm not as well prepared as I'd like to be. So I'm Anne Cvetkovich, sometimes known colloquially outside academe as Dr. Anne, but a doctor of sex or a sex doctor in more the academic sense. And one of the things I can't do. Part of the goal of Conference on the Couch, as I understand it, is also to acknowledge the ways in which knowledge comes from a variety of different places, but also to mix it up and to have the academics or professors and the artists and the sex practitioners come together in order to talk about sex, which I think is a really important form of sex in public that helps to facilitate practice and to see what happens. So I've been in touch with these folks by email, and we have a couple of questions prepared. I'm also going to do a little pop-up lecture on what I think the topic of sex in public means before I ask the others to respond. So I'll be part of the circle, we'll see what happens. So just to do a little bit of introduction, facilitation, so that you know who you're going to hear from. Let's see, starting in the circle, so you can kind of get this in your head. This is an amazing group of people that represent an amazing number of projects, which I hope they will elaborate on further. So starting over here, we have Jonesy, who is part of the Kranken project going on in the lobby of the Salvage Vanguard, if you haven't been there already, in collaboration with Jaime, aka Jamie Knight. They're working together here from Los Angeles. And Jonesy has done a lot over time. I know of your work from San Francisco in the 90s, including being part of the queercore band Fag Bash, and many other art projects. The Kranken project, I'm very excited because I work on archives and art collaborations, is going to become a show in collaboration with the One Archives in Los Angeles. So I hope we'll hear more about that. And Jaime is an artist, musician, educator. I'll read this sentence because I love it. Whose practice investigates the radical intricacies of queer subjectivity, and he's. I kind of want to index geography too, to be thinking about where sex practices emerge, and we have kind of a nice mix of Austin, LA, also San Francisco, which I think of as a kind of queer sex capital. But it's nice to see it spreading around, and so Jaime's work has been shown in a number of different places, and he's currently working on starting a fine art press in LA, so I hope we'll get to hear more about that. So then I'll come over to Travis. This is Travis Mathews, who's a filmmaker based in San Francisco, has done some collaboration with PJ, as I understand it, on a recent feature called Discreet, which just wrapped up photography here in Austin.
Days ago. And also it's kind of amazing, and not to interrupt, I'm sorry.
No.
But it's kind of amazing and surreal to be here because we also used much of their house for the
Perfect. It's all about location. The feature is called Discreet. I hope you'll say more about it when you follow up. And I'm also intrigued by the fact that as part of your work on movies that focus on gay men and intimacy, Travis has a master's in counseling psychology and a background in documentary. So there you have a kind of mashup of graduate degrees and artistic practice. Then Rockie G. Is that how you go? I have it just as a G. Rocky.
My last name is Gonzalez, and
Okay.
I'm so fine with everyone knowing that.
Rocky G. Longtime Chicana activist and community organizer in Austin, founder of Frontera Fund, a practical support abortion fund, founder and director of Forbidden Film Fest, which I think is one of the projects that brings you to us here that I hope we'll get to hear more about, which is Austin's first erotic film fest, and also interested in, she's interested in working at the intersections of race, sex, immigration, gender. So I hope also we can hear more about how work on sex in public also intersects with questions of race and immigration, among others. Fantastic. Then me. Okay, next moving on to Marcus Cruz Sanchez, also based here in Austin. And I got to go to my online version. Well, I'll do this as just a super quick. Marcus also an amazing number of projects, including Festivo, the queer Latino art show. He's a practicing artist who's brought artists together to do projects. So there's one that's called the Penis Project, and another called the Vagina Project. So I think there would be some dialogue there with the Gay Men Draw Vaginas project that's going on over at Salvage Vanguard, and also has been involved with starting a Gallery Q.
Yes, with the Q Austin. So I manage a sexual health promotion program, the Q Austin, which is an empowerment project. They're all over the country. And within the space, last year, our new space, we started a regular gallery show where we highlight local queer artists.
Perfect. And I just also want to mention your involvement with HIV/AIDS activism and PrEP programs, because that might also be something that we would talk about as the way in which cultures of public sex have been crucial to promoting different modes of sexual health and responses to HIV/AIDS. And then, last but not least, we have Julie Gillis, who has also worked on an amazing number of projects, describes herself as an artist and activist focused on social justice and community. She is a producer of she describes herself, I like this too, as utilizing stories to bear witness and build community, which I think is something that we will also find ourselves talking about. And so particularly exemplifying that interest is her work as a producer of BedPost Confessions, which has been a huge success here in Austin in bringing storytellers together for public events. And then I guess there's a kind of spin-off version of this called Unspoken. So again, someone who believes in the power of the word as also part of cultures of public sex. So that's our little circle, an amazing group. And I posed a couple of questions for them, mostly just riffs on the title. And we may or may not get to do our full rounds. So I'll just preview for you that I wanted them to speak to this issue of sex in public. What does that mean? And then if we could focus in on the public part of that, like what happens when sex goes public, and how is this amazing body of work that they've been involved with one of those ways of taking sex into public in ways that it might not already be there, particularly queer and alternative forms of sexuality. We might want to talk a bit about the way in which public sex is increasingly commodified. So where do queer artists, queer understood very broadly, push that envelope. And then also, I want to ask people who are working in 2016 also what counts as sex for them. So how are we also trying to, and this I think of as a long-term queer project, proliferate all of the ways in which we think about what sex is, including placing it within broader umbrellas of intimacy, social relation, and so on. So I wanted to just say a few words, semi-professorial style. And this is partly an homage to Curran, with whom I share academic connections as well as artistic ones. So I just have really appreciated his curation of events like this that allow me to leave my campus and actually just be half a block down from my house in order to share ideas. I love a salon. And so I was happy that Curran told me that the title for the panel was inspired by this essay in an academic journal called Critical Inquiry from a special issue called Intimacy that was extremely important for me when it came out in the late 90s. Definitely kind of building on the energy of queer activisms from the late 80s and early 90s. Curran was just saying to me about, have other people in the room read this essay? Jim has. We were guessing that not so many of you would have. I'm not going to, force it on you, but if anyone wants to, I'll probably get it to you. I'll just read you, kind of Bible reading style, a couple of key moments, because I like to be able to spread the word. And this is from the final section of the essay. It's by Lauren Berlant and Michael Warner, two super important queer theorists in academia. It's from a section called Queer Counterpublics, and Michael Warner's work has been very important for this idea of creating other kinds of publics that might be counter to the mainstream. And the essay is in part about how sex and sex practices and new knowledges about sex could do that work. So, for example, they suggest that, and I want you to notice again how it's knowledge from the bedroom, the club, the street, etc., not from the classroom. Queer culture has found it necessary to develop this knowledge of sexual practices in mobile sites of drag, youth culture, music, dance, parades, flaunting, and cruising. Sites whose mobility makes them possible but also renders them hard to recognize as world-making because they are so fragile and ephemeral, hence the need to come together to make them a bit more solid as even a thing that exists, much less something that would produce knowledge that would help people live. And then as a side project, professors being able to help facilitate that by perhaps giving things, some names and some circulation in public. So the queer project that Berlant and Warner are imagining, partly for academics, and part of our discussion here could be what is the responsibility of knowledge producers to help facilitate these things. So I take that responsibility very seriously from my work. So the goal is to support forms of affective, erotic, and personal living that are public in the sense of accessible, and we could read that also in terms of new forms of disability politics, available to memory. So this is where the archive might come up, like how do we archive our sexual practices so they're available to others, including a history, including a range of constituencies and peoples, and sustained through collective activity. So sex is not just, private. It is about building relations beyond the single, the couple, the trio, the etc. So how do we do that? So that's sex in public. And then the one other thing I want to add that informs my sense of this topic or discussion is I just want to, and people might want to, also position themselves, but as moderator, I would want to position myself as 80s pro-sex feminist. So I do want to put that on the table. Two of my super Bibles, and actually I'm glad to have Annie and Beth in the audience because I think of Annie's work going way back, even before her collaborations with Beth, as being, so it's cool that we're going to have the Legacies Award tonight to acknowledge that important work from the 80s. So books like, I'll pass them around if you don't know them. These are actually kind of rare and often out of print and hard to find. Although Community Thrift in San Francisco still exists, good place to pick up these books. Powers of Desire, The Politics of Sexuality, which has stuff on like the porn wars and the female gaze, and Adrienne Rich's essay on compulsory heterosexuality and lesbian existence, and then Pleasure and Danger in Exploring Female Sexuality, which comes out of the infamous or famous Barnard Conference on Sexuality in 1982, sponsored by professors but shut down because of feminist anti-porn activists seizing the conference diary and saying that it was, anti-women, anti-feminist. And that work from the early 80s, I think, really fomented a tremendous amount of feminist work on sexuality that I think also is important to understand as foundation for HIV/AIDS activism. So a lot of pro-sex feminists, including myself, were like right on board with the sexual politics of HIV/AIDS in the late 80s and early 90s. And some of that work is now being re-archived. One of my other all-star faves in kind of queer theory world, crossing between the street and academia, is Gail Rubin, whose work on radical politics of sexuality coming out of Sex Cultures of San Francisco, so important. I hope her book, that's an ethnography of
coming out.
Yeah, I mean, she's slow. But I worked on this project for a journal I edited called GLQ, called Rethinking Sex, that was a revisiting of her famous essay Thinking Sex, and we, for the cover, we restaged an image from the Barnard Conference diary, and we also were able to publish, I'll pass this around, some excerpts from the conference diary that was initially confiscated by the Barnard College authorities. It's also very hard to find, a rare document, but hopefully they're going to put it up online, and so we were happy to be able to publish some sections from the diary of the conference.
What's a conference diary?
It was, thanks, Mocha. It was basically the program for the conference, but you'll see when I pass it around that they did it like a diary, like we're making intimate knowledge about sex public, and it was a bit like a zine, although this is the early 80s, with a lot of collage and kind of representing a particular art aesthetic with respect to how to put this knowledge together. And the lineup for that conference was amazing. You can get a sense of it. I'll pass the books around. So that's my little riff that I'm hoping will, kind of be inspiring for these folks who are doing this work in 2016 to maybe situate themselves. I know some of you have pretty long histories in relation to some of this queer lineage of creating sex in public. So, what is sex in public? That's what sex in public means to me. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to say a little bit about what it means to them. I kind of want to start with you, just because we're in the same circle, and Jonesy, I just know you to have kind of a long history with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up Gail, because the project that I'm working on, I just got her to sign on so I can interview her about specifically the project I'm working on, which is related to gay motorcycle clubs in Los Angeles. And she wrote a very important essay about the catacombs and her relationship to leather that just is very important to me. I'm trying to think where to start. There's so many places to go in from what you said. I make a lot of work about cruising. I've been cruising my whole life since I've been sexually active. The things that I probably take from my history with it is probably looking more at it from something now, especially like a lament for it, because it's not something that exists in the same way that I identify with it as, which was to just know that there's this place that you can go out and have sex. And I just think, that a lot of men my age would kind of look at that history as it being lost. It's kind of lost, and in this way now that it's reinvented itself in really exciting forms too, I think. But I would say I look at it through that lens of something that's almost historical. There's something that doesn't exist. I mean, when you go to old Cruz spots now in Los Angeles, especially, there's no one there, and the occasionally someone will like wander in, and it's usually like an older person who doesn't really utilize technology, or and it's, you know, they're there looking for something that doesn't. It's interesting to go. It's like there are these haunted grounds now that, you know, and cruising space is always kind of ephemeral in a way that it doesn't exist to everybody's eyes, and it becomes something that, you know, is only maybe going on at night, and during the day it exists as totally something else. So I have to sort of think my thoughts through
it's
on
fine.
things.
I'm just really asking for a quick, you know, response, or just like.
I make a lot of work about cruising.
How's that? Thank you for getting that concept on the table. But yeah, really, I'm not asking people to respond to me per se, but just also to riff on what sex in public means to you, and how your work projects might be responding to it. So is that good
Yeah,
as a starter?
for now that's a good
Okay.
start.
We'll just go around the circle. Yeah.
So all of my work, so I started in documentary and then kind of docu-fiction, and now I'm pretty firmly in the narrative fiction world with my work. But all of it over the past 10 years has dealt with different gay male intimacies and trying to kind of pull back the curtain on in-between moments, or moments that are often left on the editing floor. What I mean by that are, like, I feel within a sexual context, within like a sexual, people having sex in film or documentary, there are all of these ways in which there are vulnerabilities and strengths and communication and storytelling and character building that are often left out, and that are important for me to put in there and to just kind of linger on much, much more than anything that's actually in what we would traditionally call like sex, around sex. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I realized that I was kind of making work for my like 16-year-old self, like things that I never experienced or I never saw, media that I never saw, and as I was thinking about this question coming today, I was thinking about how the idea of public is also in some ways a state of mind, in that, you know, I think a lot of, if anybody sees my work or anybody's work in 2016, it's often going to be, you know, through like a phone or on a monitor or somewhere where you're probably going to be private. You're probably going to be by yourself watching that. But the importance of what I'm trying to achieve is to create stories and images that will allow somebody to not feel alone with whatever it is that they're experiencing in these kind of in-between moments I'm talking about. And for me, that often just like goes straight to different ways of exploring types of intimacy that I never saw as a kid, that I wished I would have seen. And so that's what I'm trying to do is in some ways bring the public to a private experience for people.
Cool.
That's great.
I want to say first that I love this image of you visiting these haunted cruising spaces that are empty. But I thought a lot about this question too. It does mean a lot to me, and I think that, you know, I feel like it was kind of loaded, the headline "sex in public." You know, I was like, oh, there's so many ways that we could go with this, you know. But the thing that I came down to when I was thinking about it was, I feel like it's really important to talk about where you are, what we're talking about with sex in public. Are we in San Francisco or are we in Texas? And that has a profound impact on the way that we view sex. These histories of, you know, what I consider to be second wave white feminist sexual liberation, and like what that means for people of color and what that means for like marginalized communities, and like how those sorts of definitions really, you know, they beg deeper questions, I feel like. And I think too, you know, I've been working in the adult industry for, I'm gonna say about 7 or 8 years. In retail, I do buying and blogging and things like that. I, for many years, went to, you know, adult expos, looking at, you know, what are the best like sex toy products and, you know, dildos and harnesses and things like that. And I always found that in those spaces, there was a single narrative about what sex is or what sex isn't. And generally these kinds of places were, you know, in Los Angeles and New York and San Francisco. And always I was coming home to Texas. And I've been in Austin now for 15 years, but I'm from South Texas, I'm from the border. And so always I was coming home and really thinking about, you know, my role in the industry and how that sort of impacted my analysis, my work in social justice. And actually when we decided to do Forbidden Film Fest, which was just a small erotic film festival, the idea really was to showcase artists in Texas who were, you know, filming narratives about what was erotic or sexual. And we came to this sort of place where we realized that there wasn't a lot of this knowledge being produced from Texas. There wasn't a lot of this knowledge being produced locally. A lot of the dominant narrative about what sex or feminism or erotica or queerness is or isn't has largely been imported to us, which I think, you know, ties into larger legacies of like how we culturally view sex in the South.
Cool. That's great.
Hi. So I think for me, sex in public spaces, I think a lot of it in the work that I do as far as sexual health promotion and coming into what I do now. So I've been an artist and I've been working in Austin for 19 years, and so I've done some art projects and then through some relationships with people and work with around HIV and AIDS, kind of fell into the nonprofit world, and now start new projects. And how do we depict sex in an area that, you know, you don't really see PSAs anymore. You know, you go to other cities and you see billboards that talk about this stuff, and you don't really see that here. And so looking at it in a way of how do we reintroduce that in a way that's not like the 80s and 90s and with the scare tactics, and actually talk about sex in a positive way, using humor and making it playful and fun. And a lot of it is not just talking directly about HIV and AIDS, it's just talking about sex in general and how to start that conversation with people. You know, we have some programming that sort of we coin as, you know, that sex ed that you never had. I think in Texas a lot of times we didn't receive sex ed, and if we did, it wasn't really around the kind of sex we were having or wanted to have. You know, I remember growing up that, you know, our parents had to sign permission for us to have this, and you know, luckily, and a lot of people just went to like a prayer thing instead of doing sex ed, and so my mom was a nurse, so I got to talk about penises and vaginas very openly at a young age, but we didn't really talk about sex and the act of sex and gay sex. So we like to reintroduce that conversation and kind of meet people where they're at, and so what we've started doing is creating art and campaigns and keeping sex positive art in the space. So when people come in for testing or condoms and lube, that we're able to start these conversations and really talk to them about how they talk about their own sex and how they talk about status with partners. And because we were seeing that a lot of it, these conversations just weren't being had. And so now we try to create fun PSAs and put them back in the bars, and not just at the bars, but we know that we have to meet people in their online spaces. So bringing that to hookup apps and bringing that to social media and Tumblr and using different ways to talk about sex and testing in a positive, fun way, rather than like, there's still PSAs that I see now that go out, and they're still very stigmatizing to not just HIV and AIDS, but sex, and we definitely want to take away from that and really empower people, and we do a lot of that through the art and the imagery and the messaging that we do.
BedPost has been performing for about 5 years, and it started off with the goal of being an erotic reading series, primarily fiction. But people started submitting stories, true stories about their lives, confusing stories, mortifying stories, painful stories, and that became the call and the pull. People really had a lot to say, and we wanted to have a space for them to say it and celebrate sexuality and pleasure in a playful, and I love what you're saying about the playfulness, because that is such an important component. If sex is scary, sometimes it can be scary and that's fun, but scary sex can be fun when you want it to be that way. But you want to have a place where people can really gather in person, seeing each other physically. Might be your boss, might be your neighbor. You don't know who's going to be at the show, right? And get some really great information. And we provided the audience with cards to write their own little snippet or confession of what they had a question about, or needing, afraid of. And a good half of those over the last 5 years have been questions. How do I try anal sex for the first time? I've never kissed a woman. I'm terrified. How do I even go about it? So from every angle you can imagine, ability and ethics questions and educational questions. So we really wanted to put this in an entertaining format. It's set in a bar. It's a very public house kind of feel. Rowdy, everybody's bumping up against each other. But the stories are raw and vulnerable and really celebrate the humanity of sexuality in public. And then we try to comment on those confessions when we read them. So you're kept anonymous, but we can say, oh, well, if you want to Google polyamory resources, here's some great links, and by the way, poly isn't just promiscuity, there's relationships connected to it, whatever the topic is on the card. We've had such amazing feedback, and we have such a incredibly diverse audience, I think, for Austin, coming in at different ages and a wide range of people just being who they are, and performers, really incredible performers. The harder thing that we've sort of found is that to get people on stage to tell a story, people get really, like, if they're not a performer per se, if they're not a writer per se, they don't think they should be up there. And we want to say it's a space for anyone to tell a story, and we coach them and talk with them. But we've now been working with a group of therapists who have the Southwest Sexual Health Alliance, and so they're gathering counselors and therapists together to really do a lot more work on human sexuality, which I did not know this, but you could become a therapist in Texas without really taking any classes on sex, and that would seem to me to be something that your couples might come to you to talk about. Sex and money, that would be like a huge piece of the therapeutic training, I think. So they're doing incredible work and getting lecturers in. So we're seeing people spread out and do a lot of vocal work, written work, old technologies, right? Paper technology, and asking questions. We tried very hard at the beginning, too, to always keep a political thread through the show. And it wasn't just for funsies, right? This is everybody's a sexual being. We all need to stand up for each other and be aware. So I think that has really increased the number of activists that I've seen, people that I knew in other ways, and now they're out at the Capitol fighting for rights and promoting reproductive justice, promoting sex ed in school, which is abhorrent. If existent at all.
Right.
That's a real Texas issue.
It's a huge Texas issue. My 15-year-old, he came home one day and he said, they said not to do it because you could die or something. I said, that's what happened in the class? You could die or something. I mean, and he luckily knows too much, probably, with a loud mouth like me for a mom. But yeah, these teens need support. They need imagery that mirrors what they're experiencing, and adults do too. And that's like a point where we really love what we're doing. Is we're hitting, I think, an interventive point for folks 25 and up, and we're supporting artists like Jay, who's done a million things with us, who's produced his own show, and so then it's spreading out. And I like to see that happen. Sex in public to me is we're all sexual, and we go out in public.
So.
I mean, I think for me this question is less sort of like explicitly about sex in public, and maybe a little bit more about, at least in my personal interests and work, about like the truth in sex and the truth that is ascribed to sex. And then how sexualities and now particularly how queer sexualities are presented publicly, and sort of what that means for like this sort of, you know, something that Jonesy was talking about that I feel connected to is this like idea of going to these cruising spaces. For me, it's more a little bit about sort of utopic longing for the queer radicality of the 70s, like after the sexual revolution and before the AIDS crisis, and sort of what was going on, sort of like in sort of gay theoretical writing and queer theory at that time, that sort of got shut down in a way. And that I think that like the distillation of queer sexualities into capitalism, I think is like challenging. It's a public presentation of something that in its sort of hiddenness in the past had more power, I think. You know, so I feel like there, for me, there's this like sort of interesting sort of, I mean, it's a longing for a time that I never experienced, you know, in a way of being radical with my sexuality that was maybe like, is a lost opportunity now.
Cool. Okay. That's already a lot. I'm actually going to look to you. We're at 11:44. We could do one more round, or maybe like hear from a few people and open it up. You know, I like to improvise, and that was already amazing. So maybe I'll just do one follow-up question. Anybody, we could hear from everyone or not, as you wish. My original plan was to, as I said, to follow up with asking about the public part of sex in public and then asking about the sex part. I think people have already addressed that in some ways, and I can collapse them because I think we've expressed kind of the fear maybe that we have about mainstreaming or losing a critical edge. Like, where is radical sex? Did it exist in the past? Does it exist in some places we haven't heard from yet? Location seems to be a big theme in what people have said. And I want to just index, Curran, I assume it was you that came up with this prose, but just go back to your question about how do we keep the sex in homosexuality, friskily queering bodies, bedrooms, and behaviors, what potentials and problematics do the erotic and the explicit continue to insert into our creative exploits? So I think there is a question of sort of where are we now in 2016? Are we trying to recover something that was lost, or trying to create something new that we haven't yet seen? And I'll just say also in our correspondence beforehand, my version of this was also, this is something I've been thinking about a lot. Again, the legacy of pro-sex feminisms of the 80s, queer cultures of the 90s, 70s, we've heard a lot of decades referenced. And I'm curious also about the status of sex within queer cultures where radical gender has become so prominent. So I wonder sometimes if sex has actually taken a back seat to displays of gender expression, and maybe they're all entwined. I mean, they are entwined, obviously, but gender has been, in recent years, such a site of experimentation and public display, and not always with specific reference to something we might call sexual activity. So that's just been one interest of mine. So I kind of want to come back to start with Texas, and because you mentioned Texas and also the borderlands, I wonder if we could start with you, Rocky, around this question of, sex. What is sex? What is queer sex? What is radical sex? Especially if we do try to understand it from specific locations and spaces, whether that be Texas, Austin, the borderlands, etc. Maybe we could start there with the circle and people can chime in as they wish. Is that cool to ask you about that?
I guess from my personal experience, I from a very young age growing up on the border had, this queer tendencies, right, since I was very young. And the border area in Texas is not a place where that's okay. And not a place where you most certainly cannot be out. Even still today, it's very difficult for queer folks in the Rio Grande Valley and along the border in Texas, and I'm sure in other border states as well. And I really felt like I was looking for some kind of sexual liberation when I was young, trying to figure out what sex actually was, because I was having sex with girls and boys and trying to figure out, what was good and what wasn't, and, it was kind of a hot mess. As I started to get older and look for answers in, the political and the cultural, I wasn't finding my answers in, what at that time I imagined to be like coming out of a place like San Francisco. And in my mind, as a young, person of color in South Texas, the idea of San Francisco was like this place where everyone was naked and covered in glitter all the time. Like, that's just what you imagine. Right? That's true. Yeah. I found that out later.
Apparently it's going on in San Antonio now from what we
I
saw on
mean, we
Wednesday.
definitely have some forward motion here. But it was academics and writers like Cherry Moraga and Gloria Anzaldúa that were able to then talk about what it meant for me, or they were able to like give me an example of what radical queer Chicanas and like what our experience was. And these are my historical legends. These are the women who brought my experience to the forefront of what it meant to be a sexual being and to be a woman of color and to be in this place and to be on these borderlands. And like one of the reasons that I said that immigration was important to me is because that's just what it is on the borderlands, so the intersections of like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Cherry or Gloria, but
they're in this book.
Awesome. Yeah,
I mean, what we're rolling around in bed with that Sri Moraga and Amber Hollybaugh wrote together is in this book, and a really key essay around butch femme sexualities and racial understandings.
So that all has really impacted the way that I feel about what sex is or isn't to me. And I wanted to comment on something that Julie said too, but I think it's also generational, like my daughter is the same age as Julie's son, and they're actually friends. They, get to bitch about their parents talking about inappropriate things all the time together.
They love it.
Yeah, they're like, oh, our moms are talking about dildos again. Like, it's a good time. But one of the things that I notice is that in this generation, in this next generation, they seem to not have the kind of hang-ups that we do, right? So like my daughter has this little cadre of 13 to 16-year-old baby queer friends who all sort of just kind of whenever it occurs to them change their gender pronouns, and they have all their if you look at their Tumblr profiles, they're demisexuals and they're asexual and they're this and that. They've got a whole list of these like complicated definitions for what or who they are, and I think it's really, really amazing.
And they'll call you out on it too.
Oh, yeah.
Like I made what would be normally a classic kind of joke. Oh, demisexual, asexual. That's what I call not dating. Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah.
Which it isn't. I know it's not.
Right.
But I wasn't dating in high school at all. So because I was in the marching band. But Owen was like, "Mom,
Yeah.
you know better than that." I'm like,
Yeah.
"I know."
Yeah.
So okay, no jokes with Owen. So, but it's like true. You know, they're really on it.
Yeah, it's
super on
really
it.
beautiful. It's super amazing. And so I think, you know, what you were saying about really wanting to, this like fantasy of like being able to participate in this moment in time when we felt like things were, you know, a certain way that maybe we didn't get to explore. I feel like it's all fluid, and if anything, the younger generation has really demonstrated that. Like they're coming to this place where like, you know, my daughter actually said something really interesting to me one time because I also made an inappropriate joke at some point about, you know, someone like being a lesbian. I was like, oh, that movie was such a lesbian movie, you know? And she was like, oh, like people aren't really like, there's like
People don't say that anymore.
People aren't lesbians.
No, I know.
Wait, no, gay people aren't lesbians. So we ended up having this like conversation because you know, my neighbors across the street, they're women who are in their like mid-50s to early 60s, and they are lesbians. And you better not tell them that there's no such thing as lesbian anymore, because they fought for that shit, and they were on the front lines of that shit, and they fought really hard to have those identities. And
Got my
so,
Labras tat.
yeah. So you know, it's just this. You see this shift across the generations of like these identities and the definitions of sex, and I think I really like what you put forth in terms of, you know, the production of knowledge, because I feel like this documents where we are right now, and that's just kind of it. I don't think that we can define anything. I think we can document where we're at, and watch what happens as we get older.
Do you want to add from Texas, Marcus?
Sure, yeah, I
Add to
mean,
that.
I went off on a tangent.
No.
Yeah,
that's
no,
perfect.
Rocky makes a lot of sense, and I totally get that. I know it is a cultural thing. It's a generational thing. You know, I come from a small town in Texas. I moved to Austin in '97, and I didn't realize how backwards everything was until I got here, and I had to relearn a lot of things, and it's still like that. You know, I'm from a small town on the Gulf Coast. It's not on the border. It's on the other side where the water is, and a traffic light and a Dairy Queen, and just a lot of ignorance and prejudice, and like when I go back there, I just get this weird feeling, because it's still, you know, as much as my family accepts me, they only accept parts of me, and so it's really interesting. And I think that had a lot to do with my sexuality and coming here, and sort of this liberation I felt, and hooking up and going to parks. And I came here like right at the start of the internet, so I was sort of doing gay.com and parks. So it was really interesting and weird. And so, yeah, and then I look at sort of my brother raising his kids, and I'm just like, I feel so bad, because it's still the same, like it's like a time warp, a time capsule almost. And I know there's little Texas towns like that all over. And then when we come here and we're in Austin, and you know, we're this little blue oasis, we still see pockets of ignorance and stupid things that happen all the time, and it's just so frustrating. But you know, like Rocky said, there is this whole generation that embraces their sexuality differently, and all the things that come with it, and it's really beautiful and cool. And I try to empower that and learn as much as I can, because it's changing a lot, and it's constantly changing, and so that's really beautiful and cool, and you know, and a lot of it, and a big part of that is self-expression and sexual expression, and providing these spaces to be able to do that, have these safe spaces. And what's interesting is, you know, as cool as Austin is, we don't have an LGBTQ center. You know, we try to operate our space as much as we can by staying on target with what we're funded to do. So we do try to create this safe space for anyone, and we've seen people come in and you know, with their bags, and they walk in and they go into the bathroom and come up with, you know, high heels and makeup, and it's great and it's beautiful, but then it's sad to see them have to go and change again before they leave. And you know, that's where we are. And, but I see it changing, and I see little pockets of really positive, cool things, and like this coming together now and having these conversations and it being documented and it being out there and on social media helps a lot with the diffusion of innovations. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Texas is weird. I mean, in Austin, as liberal and progressive as it says it is, there are still a lot of folks who they've had so much privilege, and straight individuals, who many of whom come to BedPost, and we tried very hard to curate our show so we have a lot of everything in the show, and but we get a lot of submissions from women, LGBTQ world, and very few from straight men at all. And I feel sort of terribly sad because I know there is straight male sexuality that there's like shame involved, and there's this like privilege that's concretized, this horrible feeling they're supposed to be experts at everything. And some of the submissions we've gotten that we've had are like, they're so sad and so terrifying. They're like, I kind of want to radically open that up for generations that are younger, because sexuality in Texas is shamed flat out, no matter who you are, right? So, different types of shame, certainly, and different levels, but it's like, you're bad if you get pregnant, you're bad if you don't get pregnant, you're bad if you have an abortion, you're bad if you don't have an abortion. It's like, you're just bad. Your bodies are bad. Your genitals are just terrible, horrible things. When they're not, and they're wonderful, beautiful things, and no one gets the chance to actually grow into their sexuality in a state like this.
And I think that's where queer culture has so much to offer, but yeah, this is kind of very interesting to have this Texas angle. I feel that as someone who was not born and raised here, has been teaching here for many years, and feels very keenly the lack of sex education. You know, by the time people, I'm so happy one of my students is in the audience. But through the work I do, I've become painfully aware of the just horrible effects of abstinence-only sex education, which is basically what most young people in Texas get. So they arrive at college, having had
nothing
contact through the semi-formal mechanisms of the classroom. So it's the street, and it's great that there is this other insurgent energy that's part of what we're talking about. Knowledge comes from a variety of places, but we could be using the resource that is our educational institutions in some very different ways. So. Do the folks who are not currently living in Texas want to comment at all on any of that issue about place and location before we open it out to the audience?
Well, this conversation, I was a high school teacher for 10 years in Berkeley, California, starting in like 2003, during the time where like the first trans students were transitioning in high school at Berkeley High, and I was always so impressed at how it didn't matter to anybody. Really, nobody cared. Nobody thought it was weird. But at the same time, I also was keenly aware of the kind of gay baiting and gay shaming that was also going on at the same time. And so I think it's interesting to think about youth culture. And this for me, this is like coming back to this idea of like the truth in sex or the truth in sexuality, that like who you have sex with or how you present yourself sexually essentializes you in some way. And I think that queer youth or youth in general don't necessarily see sex that way. And I think that that's really interesting. And I grew up in Albuquerque, and that is not far off from Texas, and I had two parents that never talked about sex, ever. And, I think I had weird abstinence-only sex ed in 8th grade or something like that, and then nothing else. So I don't think, and I think that today, I think it's interesting because kids don't necessarily need sex education in school, because they have this like information available to them on the internet and stuff, and kids know more. I mean, I talk to teenagers that tell me stuff that I'm like, I have never heard of that. Like, that's amazing. And they're not afraid to be public about their sexual desire or sexual identities or anything like that. And from what I see,
Can I comment on that?
Of course.
I want to give a huge shout out to the Unitarian Universalists and that do the OWL training, which is Our Whole Lives training, and that starts at like 1st grade and extends into college, and they're doing adult modules, and they're beautifully done, beautifully facilitated. And I noticed now watching Owen, he will ask questions, but he doesn't want to ask them directly anymore. Like in 7th grade, he'd be like, "Do girls ejaculate?" And I'd be like, "Well, maybe." You know, like how do you answer that question without going to like YouTube? That would not necessarily be the moment I want to have with my my kid. But the OWL, they can ask those questions, and they've got these adults who are not your parent, but school is a weird place. But there are spaces, I think, for that kind of feeling, and how do you do consent, and you know.
Well, and I think the thing also about the like messed up or fucked up like sex education that. Or sex non-education that's happening is that kids, even teenagers, you know, you say this thing, like you guys talked about like making these jokes to your kids that they like called you out on, and like adults say things to kids up until they're adults that stick. You know, and I think about like sort of my own issues that I can sort of now as an adult trace back to things that my parents said to me or my grandparents said to me as a kid that really stuck, you know. And I think that I mean, this is maybe like a little bit different conversation than what we're meant to be having here, but thinking about like kids and sexuality and the way that our generation or my generation sort of had these like terrible experiences as kids and how we pass that knowledge on. And that's like I'm really interested in like that's what I keep talking about, this idea of truth and sex or truth and sexuality, and like pulling those two things apart, because I think that we do place a lot of it is a powerful thing, but I also think we ascribe a lot of power to it in a way that can be damaging. You know.
Agreed.
Do either? Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I just wanted to say something about Texas. So I've lived in San Francisco for about the last 20 years, and I was here over this past summer with a very prolonged pre-production on a film that is still suspended. But while I was here, I was on the apps, and like part of it was like I was on the apps, and part of it was like I was just like kind of just exploring all of that from almost an anthropological lens of like, how is this different in, I think what Rick Perry said, the blueberry in his tomato soup, Texas? Like how liberal was Austin really compared to like what I had experienced in like San Francisco? And the thing that I kept discovering that I was fascinated with and continue to be fascinated with was just the number of, well, the film that I just finished making is called Discreet.
And so you feel it in the South a lot.
Yeah.
People publicly or putting on their Discreet. Like, you know,
Discreet,
like,
so much of that. I mean, to the point where like often, I mean, you have the grid of different people you might be looking at on one of these apps like Grindr, and it's like more often than not, I would look on there and over 50% would be people with just like black boxes, or people that, you know, would not show their faces for reasons that are not just about showing their like abs, but were more about like staying closeted or semi-closeted. And so this kind of became the seeds of what this film is becoming, in terms of just exploring these different levels of discretion and how they can be, how problematic they can be, and the sort of ripple effects of that. And an added layer of what I discovered were guys who are actually out, and like even publicly out, but fetishize the idea of being discreet, and that sort of play of, you know, like maybe you grew up with such a shamed experience or something that like you fetishize that, and that interplay is something that I think is pretty fascinating. And I mean, to your interest in cruising, I feel like the apps are the closest thing. It's like digital millennial cruising in ways that are not all good and not all bad, but in certain geographic places.
It's the same adrenaline, maybe, but there's a different code of danger.
A different code of danger in what way?
Well, you're not publicly putting yourself out there in a way where you're potentially could be arrested for having sex
Right.
in public. So
Right,
you're
exactly.
it's it's just a very different experience. And watching like years of it happening, and I'm very interested in how it changes, how it's like gone from one place to the next. Seeing that, and when you said discreet, I was like, is that going to be about, like, you know, when you said the name of your movie, I was like, it's got to be, you know, something along those lines is what I was guessing. But yeah, just watching, you know, the older forms of cruising were dangerous. You know, I mean, and exciting. That's the whole thing. There's an adrenaline to it that you're not getting in the same way by swiping. You know?
But I also
But you're adrenalized. It's just, I think it's just, they're just different. They're different adrenal powers.
Yeah, I mean, it can be more
danger
like
is-
shopping than cruising. sometimes.
Exactly.
But I do think it's, I mean, one of
And
the
also, you don't have the same level of confrontation that you're going to in a group, in a space where a lot of people are cruising, and sometimes that would be a real mix of people too. It was
Yeah.
drag queens and, you know, women, you know, like some women in San Francisco, Collingwood Park, women pretending to be men, and it was exciting, you know, like in this way that you're not gonna ever, I mean, there's plenty of ways that it's being recreated physically in a space that isn't the internet or apps or whatever, I think.
Sure.
But, and that's, I think, you know, the exciting thing about the potential, like, what people really looking at it, like from the historical perspective into how, and like, just throw it all in there and let's try every different way. Because there is like a real rich history that people are really, I think, want to explore, you know, and we have this past that we shouldn't lose because I don't know how you get danger back in the same way, you know?
It's a different kind of danger, but I'm thinking about the Ashley Madison hack,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So your face on the internet,
Yeah.
someone can
Yeah.
find it.
Of course.
Right? It's not like a real in time, you and me right now in this park
Right.
danger. But it's definitely, I think about all these different dating sites and all of these different, like, FetLife and different kink sites and things where people put their credit card information in, or they have videos of themselves doing things to show other people to, you know, then connect with them. There's still a risk inherent there. It's a different kind of risk.
Of that becoming public.
Of that becoming
in a very
public.
different way, yeah.
Or a regime change. That, like,
Yeah.
basically.
Or rejection.
Yeah,
Very
rejection
different
is.
experience rejection in a public space intimately than digital.
So I think I want to throw it open to the audience. Karen, I'll let you be our timekeeper as to how much time that would be. Yeah. All right. Looks like we got some comments. We'll take you and then Mike.
Two quick things. I think there's a risk factor also when you consider that hookup apps abroad are being used by police to actually capture and trap and like.
Of course.
And then the other thing is that while I think internet-based sex education, may kind of wisen kids up a little bit, I don't think it really teaches a lot in terms of negotiation and the actual like figuring out the moment before sex. And so I feel like that's kind of lost too. Not that sex education maybe ever taught that. I don't know.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to take my cue from my good friend Jim here and provide some observations and thoughts about what I just heard and then maybe ask a question. Because I really enjoyed this conversation. And Julie, I really liked how you queered the whole idea of sex in public by basically saying that if there's a human, then it's sex in public, right? Like the always already, that recognizing that humans mean sex, humans mean sexuality. And that's just a whole different, way of thinking about like, public. But anyway, so thank you for the comment. It was interesting how people, when we went around, there was a difference between talking about sex in public in a discursive way and how we talk about sex in public versus how we do sex in public. So it's interesting that concept developed. And Rockie, I was just fascinated by how you talked about how difficult it was to have queer sex at the border, because that immediately makes me think of the idea of the mestiza and how, right, was that Anzaldúa? The mestiza? And the idea of, not that in-between identity, right? And that queering of ethnicity and just how the irony of, like, you're at the border, queerness is all about transgressing borders and changing borders and sometimes having borders, but that specifically, like, I wonder what the relationship is between, being at the border and having that border be so highly policed and having sexuality being highly policed. And do you own Forbidden Fruit?
No, I don't.
Okay, okay. Because I was going to ask a question about Forbidden Fruit.
You can, though. I worked in partnership with the owner for many, many years. And I
Okay.
managed
Okay, great. Okay, because like for a long time, Forbidden Fruit was I remember like the one on 6th Street, I would have to avoid because I remember a friend came from Toronto and she wanted to go to it. And I was like, okay, well, we're just going to go in and there's going to be some straight people and they're going to be laughing at all the sex toys. And we went 6th Street and we went in and there was a bachelorette party and they were picking everything up and laughing at it, and which kind of like, actually, I mean, that's good that it's there because they're laughing at it, but they really do want to know about it, right? They're providing this service. But I was just going to ask if what you noticed over the years of things changing, because I'm fascinated by how the conversation about digital and the internet has changed everything and the new generation. But have you, like, just physically people going into a sex store, is it different?
Yes, it's very different. Just a quick background, Forbidden Fruit is Texas's oldest and first sex shop. It's run by a very good friend of mine and mentor, Lynn Raridan. And she she took ownership of Forbidden Fruit in 1981 when she was just, I think, 22 years old. And so at that time in Texas, things were pretty intense. And
A dildo was a marital aid.
Yes, it was educational. So Forbidden Fruit went through a lot of things, including in the 80s and 90s, many raids and shutdowns by the police. And one of the things that I wanted to mention that disconnects with that in Sex in Public is that the shop that we had downtown on 6th Street was there for many years, and that building is historical. And we would have people come around there who just wanted to see the shop because it kind of had this legacy of this place in Texas that was nowhere near like a Babes in Toyland or whatever, but like it was aspiring, because of, again, our place, like where we are, right? But the door of that shop faces directly out onto, 6th and Neches. And so when they block off downtown for like the partiers and whatnot, and you would have the rangers come through on horses to shut it down at the end of the night, if they were able to see, because we would leave the door open, so if a ranger passed by and they could see a model hanging up on the wall that had a dildo on it, or any sort of visual sexual thing at all, they would come in and they would shut us down. And so this isn't even talking about sex in public. Just the fact that, like, even though the only people down there at that time were like drunk frats and bachelorette parties, it's still like a huge problem for our society to even just that is potentially exposed to some I don't know, innocent passing by who may have their eyes burned out by God if they were to see that. So it's a very real thing, and people I think still come into the shop, and for many, many years, I don't work there anymore, but I did for 7-8 years. I worked very closely with Lynn Raridan, and one of the things that was really surprising to me was grown people coming into the shop, because you can buy a dildo online, but you can't really see how it feels or what size it is or how that purple glitter actually looks or whatever, right? But people would come in and kind of, like you're saying, they would joke around like, oh, ha ha ha, no, but really, like,
yeah, wrap it up.
What the hell is this thing? Yeah. And so we did, just by being in the shop, there was all of this sex education that took place, and I have noticed that, like, even though it's a super, like, we would have people come in there and they've never had a dildo before. We would have people come in there and they're professional leather workers selling their goods. We have, like, folks who are, deeply embedded in the kink community coming in there and, just having, like, community around it. And for me, like, in all of those years that I was there, it felt like it never changed. There was always that person who had never had a dildo walking in the door. There was always those lifelong kinksters coming in the doors. And so I feel like the sort of place that Forbidden Fruit holds is this kind of moment in time for everyone, so less and less people are coming in for the dick straws for their bachelorette parties and things like that. But there are still those people out there who want that. I'll see like women will come from like Dallas or San Antonio or Waco, and they'll come to Forbidden Fruit. They make these hour-long drives to come to these shops because that's the only place that they can get dick straws without that coming up on their credit card thing by ordering it online. So just an interesting little bit. And one of the things that we celebrated was, and Forbidden Fruit is actually featured in a documentary called Dildo Diaries that compares, Texas gun laws with the dildo laws, and it refers to a statute of the Texas Constitution that's it's called the Texas obscenity laws that were only recently overturned in 2009, which made sodomy illegal, which made when people came into our shop, we were not allowed to say dildo. Yeah. So we couldn't say that. We had to say this is an educational model, and we couldn't say vibrator. So we had to say this is a personal massager, and we would have. It was weirdly TABC who policed that. So we would have, like agents come in and try and get that.
You have to be part of when you walk in the store.
Yeah. So until 2009, it was illegal.
You could only have a certain amount of dildos as well.
You could only have 5 or less. Otherwise, you could be charged with. And they tried to put this on Forbidden Fruit once. Intent to distribute obscene material.
Although it was very delayed.
Yeah. And there was that woman up in was it Burlesque who was arrested. She did passion parties.
Yeah.
And it was just like a whole bunch of church ladies didn't like her because she was messing up the purity of the Burlesque, I guess. And so they had her arrested because she had more than 5 dildos.
You can have as many hustlers as you want.
Oh yeah,
those are fun.
And I believe you can have as many butt plugs as you want.
Unfortunately, it's got Jim. I'm just looking. I'm just looking to see who else might want to make comments, or you're welcome to, Annie. Just to take the measure of the room and then have a round of comments and before we close it out. Do you want to speak to? I would love to invite you to comment. Yeah.
2 things. When you said hustlers, you can have. I guess you were meaning the magazine.
Yes.
Oh, I was thinking hustlers. That's still not okay. Between like the 70s, I got into adults, so 73, and prostitution is unfortunately still illegal. Pornography is legal. But the big thing was AIDS. There's before AIDS and there's after AIDS. So with public sex, in my experience over the decades, that was a huge, huge shift. Because we were right, Jim. We were so free. To have public sex, and where there were I was in Manhattan, so there were the trucks, the piers, all sex clubs like galore, and there was no fear of, you saw your friends at the VD clinic or the amoebas clinic or whatever, and it was no big deal. And then of course it became a life-threatening thing and then of course the younger generations grow up with the fear of AIDS, and that's a huge shift from those of us that had the 20s and 30s before. But that was just my thought.
So again, we come back to questions of history. You had a hand up.
Yeah, it was about going back to history and in particular youth and taking it to the group and like how you deal with. There was a discussion of if we're reinventing or celebrating something lost or trying to create something new. And I think with youth, they have the access of putting it on the internet, and when they're the first ones to put it on the internet, then they automatically feel like they created it. And so it's dealing with the erasure of the legacy of queer sex. And for example, last year I was at the the Creating Change up in Colorado, and I went to a feminist forum discussion, and it was one facilitator, a room full of about 100 folks, and your name was not mentioned, nor was Candida Royale or any of the other founding, just some of the historical stuff. It was all Gisli, it was all Courtney Troubles, and which is great, I mean, and don't want to. I think their work is great, but how do y'all deal with the erasure of some of this stuff? And I have to study this stuff, and I thank you, Karen, for making the space available, because I was in a cusp from. I didn't have access to internet growing up, so learning this history has healed so much of me. But when you have youth that, if it doesn't exist on the internet, it never existed, how do you deal with that?
I think, Jim, do you want to, I think of you as our repository of historical memory at this conference.
I would like to, just very quickly, and I'll try to be quick about it. I feel like I'm channeling my old boyfriend Joe Brainard, because I'm going to say, I remember. I remember having sex with men in the 50s. I remember having sex with men and women in the 60s. I remember the Stonewall Rebellion, when we became visual. Visible to the world at large, and our sexuality became visible. I remember when the mafia controlled everything. I remember when gay entrepreneurism, or queer entrepreneurism, if you will, took over. I remember the commodification of sex because of the business aspect of it. I remember disco, ecstasy, quaaludes, back rooms, and bathhouses of the 70s. I remember AIDS.
I remember.
I remember Pariah magazine talking about people who were HIV positive who had AIDS and their sexuality. I remember how to have sex in an epidemic. I remember all of these things. I remember when I first started reading queer theory. And I was very upset about it for one reason. I felt that the emphasis on sex acts as defining who you were as opposed to the whole person emotionally. And when I remember I start saying that in that circle, I was not listened to because of all the meaning of emotions and where do they come from and all that sort of stuff. And I have to just say that if you haven't seen Travis's films, you really have to, because Travis Mathews' films to me brings the whole person and a community and about how we have sex today that is very different from how I had sex for many years, or Jonesy will talk about. I'm not into nostalgia. For a long, I think there is longing, but I'm not into nostalgia. Some of the sex clubs that get really sort of mythologized was a very small segment of the community in San Francisco, or the community in New York, and the Fire Island. That wasn't most people's lives in those times. And we have mythologized them in a very, I think, fetishized way. But I would just say that what I get to learn from young people is how much none of this matters to them. And that to me is the product of feminist education, feminist parenting, and what we older people did successfully to make visual how we have sex. There's no one way. And I had to learn how to let go of judging how other people had sex. Gail Rubin was a big troublemaker in my mind. Okay? but I think that those things are really, really important. So, and when you positioned what public sex was, I took a deep breath of relief. Because it is about being visible and how we are intimate with each other in the erotic world, in the physical world, in the spiritual world. Last night's program of the films, the short films, there were two that so touched me because they were whole people. The mother of the transgender child who was murdered, and the artist, I don't remember his name, and the transition of the two-spirit, which brought in spirituality. Sex, in many ways, is a ritual of spirituality. That's been lost from the hippie days. And we own it. We own it. We have something to teach those people about what sex is really about. And not to and this is why I come here and why I think what Curran and TJ and all of you put together is we don't have to act like straight people. You know, we don't have to have sex like straight people. But we can share what we have learned out of darkness into the light.
Woohoo! All right. Shall we end the on that little preaching moment?
Please stick around.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah, there's going to be a performance from Kegels for Hegel in a little bit, so stay tuned for that.